All right, welcome to another episode of Scale Up Soundbites, where we discuss bite-sized ideas to help you scale up your team and your career. Today, I'm joined on the couch with the one and only Rozario Chivers, who has been head of digital technology for QBE, and also held some pretty high up architecture roles at Macquarie Bank, GBST, and iCare. Today, we're discussing why digital transformations fail in many large enterprises. So, Roz, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Mate, so what is transformation?
I think that's a really good question. One of the things that we often miss is going back to basics and understanding what some of the terms that we use mean, and like coming up with a definition of transformation. Like transformation for me personally means transitioning from one state to another target state. So obviously you can see that happening in a lot of organizations. I think what gets lost literally in that translation is the context of the meaning of that word is unique for each individual organization, person, and any group that's going through that type of or any type of transformation. So having a generic set of language and words is useful, but you kind of need to take it right back to what does it mean for that organization as well. If an organization is going through transformation, you can also have personal transformation. So transformation, there's a lot to unpack with just the word, because it can mean a lot to an individual all the way through to an organization.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, cool. I think, that definitely resonates with me as well, with my own personal journey and how you transform into an adult and stuff. I've recently transformed a lot becoming a father. I know you're a dad as well, so we can talk a little bit about that.
Double dad.
Yeah, double dad. But okay, what about digital transformation and large companies? It's a huge word we get thrown around, especially in the modern tech space. I see Australia, big corporates. It seems like everyone's going through or has gone through a digital transformation, a major one recently. With your experience, I think you've been involved in a few.
Yeah.
How do companies do it well, and how do companies do it, and we're talking about why do they fail? So, how do they do it well, and
where's some of the challenges?
Good. Yeah.
So where I've seen it operate very successfully, and I can hold my hand up. I think QB are doing some really good things at the moment, and there's some really good leaders pushing for change. So you need good leadership buy-in from the top to kind of push through that change. But you also need this kind of bottom-up effect. So you need to kind of build enough communities and culture to kind of support bottom-up. Mm-hmm. So you kind of meet in the middle. And there's some really good things happening with organisations across Australia with that, because I think more and more people are becoming aware of what the mistakes of the past were. And it used to be very top-down driven, but with no bottom-up. Yeah. So culture is significantly important. But one of the things I've seen, the really more mature organisations that get this right, what they will tend to do is they'll do a baseline of where they're at. So they'll do a whole bunch of metrics and assessments to say what are operational practices, where's our digital maturity at, where's our DevSecOps maturity, so if it's digital, where's our customer maturity and UX maturity. They get all that scored and they arrive at a baseline, because if you can't measure, you can't improve, because you don't know where you were at before. So there's no deltas. So if you establish good baselines and you get a good understanding of where your friction and your problem areas are, but also your opportunities, so you can kind of map out the areas where you've got key opportunities and areas where you've got lots of challenges, and you can highlight areas of friction and there's a whole bunch of different techniques. I've been in organisations that had really good service blueprints, for example, and that would show you clearly, how operational practices work backstage and front stage, with all the areas annotated to show where your friction points are. So you can kind of leverage a whole bunch of different techniques, especially from service design, that illustrate where your challenges are going to be. And then if you have that good baseline, you can then use that to inform how you go about the transformation, because you can then prioritize.
Yep.
Instead of because what you'll find is some organizations jump at the most shiniest thing that's trending in industry. And right now, and you've got a whole bunch of consultancies that benefit from this, is scaled agile. So it's become a bit of a religion. It's like it's useful, but I would suggest scaled agile should be something you should unpack and you customize it for the needs of your organization. You should not do a one size fits all. Because it never works.
Yeah, that shiny object thing. Or you see the digital trends that happen. I remember when big data came out, 10 years, it was the biggest thing. It was like teenage sex, right? Everyone's talking about it, saying they do it, but no one really knows how to have a clue. It was like the funniest meme at the time. Then DevOps, going to the cloud. A lot of the companies tried to do it, but never really understood why they were doing it.
So I think that one of the challenges with that, a lot of companies did lift and shift. So just replicating existing patterns that they had in their on-prem and then replicating it like for like in cloud, and that's completely flawed because in cloud you've got very, very different architectures and setups. One which will give you financial benefits because you can have reserved instances and lower your costs for and shut things down and have automated scripts, all that kind of stuff. And then it's different types of load balancing and load sharing and technologies that you can leverage that will be very different to what you had when you had any on-prem kind of hosting pattern. So lift and shift again is another problem where people just think they can just replicate what they had before in cloud, and the cost profiles are very different, but also the technologies you can leverage will be very different. And you can actually leapfrog some organizations that deliberately put time and effort into investing in new cloud architectures and infrastructure. And this also means having cloud architects. Another mistake some companies will make is they'll use the same solution architects and enterprise architects, transition them across when they're doing cloud, but don't give them any support and training and understanding what the new, what these new target technologies can provide. So you actually need cloud architects and you need things like FinOps and all these other things where you're managing your cost of your infrastructure. Because I worked at News International well over 12, 15 years ago. And one of our product owners walked around the floor and said, who knows what servers we've got turned on at any one point in time? No one did. We had devs deploying stuff in different dev environments, just left them on over the weekends. And we were churning through cash, like 30 grand a month, with devs just leaving stuff on overnight. So he just turned everything off, and he saved them like hundreds of thousands.
Just turn it off.
Pounds. Just literally, it's quite brutal. He just said, "I'm turning everything off, and if you need it, come running to me."
Turn on.
Because back then we didn't have a concept of FinOps and managing costs or having scripts that would shut down instances overnight. So it kind of illustrates, and what you'll find is companies that are on this early maturity curve to things like cloud, they're not aware of these little things that create problems. Because one of the hidden facts, I don't know the exact number, but there is a Gartner study that talks about this. I think after a year of a transformation to cloud, a lot of organizations spend a lot more than what they were doing with on-prem. And it's to do with some of the factors I mentioned, like the maturity around managing their costs, but also knowing what type of cloud systems to use that are different to what they were using before. It's not like for like.
So one of the major selling points of going to cloud being cost saver, or could have been, I'm not too sure if it is. Didn't really have
it doesn't translate.
Okay, cool. So I think what you discussed before was establishing a good baseline as probably the first step for a digital transformation. And then you'll talk about leadership before that. So my next question was, how does leadership play in the role of success or failure?
Well, they are key. So if you don't have leadership that understand, and we talked about skin in the game before.
Yes.
So if you don't have leadership that really understand or have empathy for the challenges and opportunities that the people that they support are going through, then there will be a disconnect. And that's why leadership support and buy-in is really vital, because it's I've seen a lot of transformation initiatives die because leadership weren't invested or didn't understand what the people they supported were going through. So for example, you'll see things being raised over, it might be things like admin access for developers, which was a challenge in all of my previous roles actually. And because you'll have leadership that don't live that daily routine of an engineer, to them, it's quite simple to say, look, we'll just follow the security policy. And we'll say everything's locked down, and you must send us no ticket or some type kind of ticketing system to get access every time you need to install something.
Mm-hmm.
But because they don't have the daily life of a developer, they don't know that developers are installing packages like 15 times a day.
Yep.
And
So
you
it's
can't
15 separate
afford to be
tickets you're gonna be
sending
doing.
tickets each time you need to get something installed. That's a really horrible life.
Yeah.
So, and it's because of that lack of context that you'll have leaders make these blanket decisions.
Yeah.
Right. So whereas if we had more of this kind of connection between like what the routine is for the people they support and then why they're saying it's a challenge, and because it's something else that you'll see is some leaders will dismiss it. Instead of saying like this keeps bubbling up over and over and over, maybe there's something to it. Maybe I need to sit and listen and understand why we have these complaints or why we have these suggestions for improvement constantly coming up.
Yep.
So leadership support and trust
Yeah.
is a really big part of making these efforts successful.
Yeah, trust both ways. It's funny, like you mentioned that ticketing example about giving developers trust and access, or the admin access. I remember when I went to London, I think it was in 2013 to 2015, and when I was over there, they hadn't had like tap as you go as a payment facility, and I felt like I was just stepping backwards in time, right? Because it was all rampant here. And then I was doing a lot of work with investment banks, asset managers, and a lot of real traditional organisations that had that sort of top-down hierarchy, and none of them had any real digital presence with how they were engaging their customers and stuff like that. And it baffled me that these corporations like even existed and were able to compete still with the market over there, but just so far behind in what we were doing. But now listening to you and how like these organisations are sort of structured, kind of makes sense, because if they've got these sort of theories of management style where they don't have that access and don't have that sort of freedom, incorporating any change would be incredibly hard and incredibly difficult.
It is, yeah. And what you'll find is the systems of communication are the barriers.
Yeah.
So, and that's something, again, that we don't do enough of when we're doing transformation. We should be also holistically looking at, and we're talking about flow, weren't we, before?
Yeah,
about you need to look at flow, and not just the concept of like flow being in the zone and developing or doing work, but flow of information. Yeah. And you need to see where that information is flowing and where key decisions are being made. Yeah. And we don't do that enough. Yeah, interesting. And if you're looking at where key decisions are being made, you can identify where challenges are happening. I think, yeah. So in previous organisations, we know, and it's not just me. I've worked with enterprise architects and engineers who spotted this. We were noticing a lot of decisions happening, and you wouldn't even expect this. Not at leadership level. They're actually happening with project managers, because they had so much control over budgets. And what happens is, organically in some systems, the person in charge of budget is the one who gets to say whether someone stays or goes, or what gets built and what doesn't get built. And it creates this implicit bias with individuals who kind of gravitate to that, where they start taking a lot more control than they should be. Yep. And they're literally shutting down things like architecture decisions and engineering decisions just because they have the ability to say, I'm not funding it. That power comes into play. Yeah, and you end up with these weird kind of zones where decisions are being made that completely override what the enterprise architecture or global standards or anything else. And most organizations don't even know these things are happening. Yeah, right. It kind of happens through word of mouth that, why is that person made that decision to shut that project down? Or why did that person decide not to build that service? And then you find out project manager shut it down. And you're like, why would they even do that? And how did they manage to get away? So, and then you see that it's not just one, there's many patterns of that behavior. Yeah. And I'm not just going to pick on project managers. No. I've seen this happen across the board. Yeah. Where you've got kind of these weird silos where little power bases arrive. Yeah, right. This is where you need to pay attention to information flow. Yeah. And where the decisions are being made. Yeah. And is it really with leadership, or is it really with your governance structures? Yeah. Or is there like a tacit structure happening underneath that? Yeah. We're going to touch on something very soon that I think you're trying to lead to there. But before we do that, and we'll talk about like organizational flow, and I think like one of the characteristics of flow is that continuous feedback.
loop and the continuous feedback cycle when you're actually sending and receiving feedback at the same time and you're in that sort of optimal level. And it is possible for people to become in a state of flow together, and you see that with like football stadiums and music rock concerts and everything, and you can actually feel the energy turn.
Have you seen? Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's all right.
Have you seen the example of people playing Pong?
No.
In a stadium. So
no.
there's a YouTube video. So they gave controllers to a whole bunch of people in the stadium.
Yeah.
And then they had one group be the left paddle, and then the other group be the right paddle.
Yeah.
And they actually managed to play Pong.
Yeah, and it's all together, harmoniously playing it. Yeah. So
and it's like, and I'm going to start ranting.
That's all right. We go down wormholes, man. It's all good. We should have did this disclaimer at the start.
I don't like the word hate, but I really dislike the way we talk about biology and say it's like cellular machines, and they're not machines. And the way we describe bacteria. Bacteria arrive at like group decisions, we call it quorum sensing. We try to make that mechanistic, and it's not mechanistic. So what's really going on with atoms and these bacteria is they're actually societies, the individual autonomous intelligences that are building their own collective intelligence, right? And this is what happens when humans play Pong, and bacteria is no different. You don't call that mechanistic, right? Just the same way if you don't look at a zoomed out city and go, that's mechanistic.
Yep.
So it's kind of naive of humans and scientists to label any biological system as mechanistic. It's obviously not.
Yeah.
Like it's the same structures, city down to a bacterial collection. They're the same. There's collective intelligences.
Yeah, interesting.
So like, very interesting that you can have this collective behaviour and they can arrive at decisions as groups.
Yeah. So and that's 100% possible to get into that state of flow as a company if there are certain characteristics that the company's built around. One being an effective communication strategy. I think another one is enabling trust and the opportunity to be vulnerable. And
should I tell you another one?
Which
is huge.
Yeah, go for it.
And again, it's charged. Truth.
Yeah, truth.
So if you have systems where there's a lack of accountability and a lack of honesty, especially from leadership, because that basically gets embodied.
Where you're allowed to have, where you don't have that fear of conflict, right? Where you can speak your mind. Keep going.
And psychological safety.
Yeah, and then we're talking about, I love his work. It's my favourite leadership book of all time. Lee and Sony's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, but one of that period. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah. So, no. So I agree. So honesty is like one of the really big factors that a lot of organisations miss. You can't have a system built on illusions because you're making decisions based on false reality. And you'll see a lot of organisations go through things like that. It's like scaled up behaviours of what you see within an individual. So you'll see organisations going through denial. And I think we were talking about this before, organisations that have so much operational tech debt that they keep deferring it every year. And that's a form of denial, right? And you see this organisational denial going on. So, but if you have this ability for an organisation to embrace truth, and it's hard. Jordan Peterson talks about this stuff. One of the highest principles you can hold yourself to is to be truthful, but it's hard.
Tell the truth, or at least
truth.
don't lie, right?
It's very hard, right? Because you end up upsetting people because each of us have got our own individual perspectives, and speaking your own personal truth can be upsetting to others. So that's why there's an interesting line to be drawn. So truth for me is needed because you need to be able to make accurate decisions. And if you have a group and teams that you support that operate in that same mindset, you can get a lot more things done.
Truth is needed. And I think a big thing you always speak about when we're always having these phone discussions is empathy as well. So truth and empathy should be correlated with each other.
They are. So there is like this.
You've got to have that sort of filter. You can't just be.
We talked about some esoteric stuff, but one of the rules that you'll learn if you study esoteric mysticism is that judgment lowers awareness. It's kind of obvious that it does because you start assuming a person's one way.
Judgment.
And you literally know like a tiny dot compared to this giant sun-sized object of what a person's life is.
Yeah, exactly.
So
you have no idea. Yeah, exactly. So your truth is going to be completely different to my truth.
Judgment always puts you down a narrow path. Whereas if you're empathetic, you'll always try and put yourself in that person's shoes. So it opens up this bubble of awareness. You start really understanding more of what they're going through and why they've arrived at certain decisions. And that's been a journey for me. I used to jump to judgment in the past, about a decade ago, and jump on people. But now I'm learning to kind of sit with them and understand, like how did they arrive at that perspective and that viewpoint? And a lot of the times it's justified. You start realizing they're seeing things I don't see.
Yep.
You know, and it helps you grow as an individual.
Yeah.
So that trust, along with empathy, raises awareness.
Such a powerful tool as a leader of people, I think. Yeah. Especially when you're going through transformations and stuff and things.
And that's also why you should become a servant leader.
Yeah.
So that's why this pyramid's all the one way around.
Yeah.
Like when servant leadership inherently needs empathy and trust.
Yeah.
Because what you're doing is you're giving autonomy and power to individuals so they can succeed. But what you do is provide guardrails and guidance, which is what the original leadership structures of human society were, bottom up.
Yeah.
You know, and they're basically almost like gardeners, you know, making sure that this garden has all the variables and all the support to kind of grow in its right way, but it's down to that individual to find its own growth. But the gardener's there to guide. You know, not to dystopian top-down control, not to try and net those paradigms, but to support.
Yeah, and I love that idea. I mean, and I'm a surfer, right? So the idea of energy coming from the ground is a groundswell, like a groundswell of energy that flows in. It's quite a powerful energy that can travel the world when it gets going. You can ride a wave, theoretically the same one, all the way around the world with the right amount of energy.
Like to destroy the world.
Or just, I mean, that can happen too. We don't want that. But yeah, the whole idea of a bottom up is such a, I don't know the history around it too much, but I did studies at university around hierarchical structures and then structures that were decentralized. And you see that now with the decentralized organization movement sort of taken up with everything out there in blockchain and the whole emerging tech world. But that
and crowdsourcing.
And crowdsourcing as well. Such a great idea. You gave a great one the other day to me about crowdsourcing the
Eye in Sky.
Yes, Eye in Sky. Yeah,
it's just awesome.
Yeah, I have to watch it. I haven't watched it yet, but we have to do it.
Yeah, add it to your list.
But it was a great idea of crowdsourcing a movie, right? And it was do you want to tell me how did that work?
So a bunch of, I think they're from Finland or Sweden, but a bunch of creators decided to kind of make a really epic movie, and they had some ideas and they posted it on the internet. And what happened is a community of like-minded people with different skill sets all built around them. And you have like animators, musicians, writers, all jumping in to kind of offer their support and skills to build out this movie, and basically crowdsourced from the ground up.
Yeah, interesting.
And it's really it's high production value.
Yeah,
it's really good.
And that can sort of speak merits of like finding the right key people to build a team of experts in that team to come together to solve a problem, allow them space to communicate together, and then run with it. And then produce.
Exactly. And the output's extremely high because back to what we were talking before, you don't have this kind of dystopian top-down single will pushing its agenda through hollowed out viewpoints. Instead, everyone has their own individual autonomy, but they're guided. There's and this happens with organizations that are high performing and teams that are high performing. As long as you've got like orientation around a set of principles and goals and a vision, so people know where they're going towards, you can then provide that autonomy because the autonomy now has direction. But things break if you don't have that. You don't have those things that Simon Sinek talks about.
Yeah, absolutely. And as soon as you have someone else's personal agenda or ego taking place, it gets in place. And that's what we're going to touch on now.
It derails, doesn't it?
It derails, it derails. But yeah, I love, study high performing teams. That I think it's Jerry Buss who owns the Lakers, and he talks about, I forget the coach came in, but transform them in 2 seasons from going to the worst performing team to the best performing team by just doing the whole 1% thing. So we're going to forget about winning. All we want to do is just get 1% better every single day, every single train, every single thing we do. We're just going to aim to get 1% better, and then that is slowly compounded. And then you talk about compound interest. And that compounded to being, making the playoffs that season and then winning the championship the next season after that. And that's all they did.
And that's in the book Turn a Ship Around as well.
Yeah, it's one of the, I haven't read that book.
The worst performing submarine crew in the Navy. And they ended up with a commander that basically he installed servant leadership. He built a framework where basically failure was accepted. It became normalized. That's another technique. Normalize failure.
Yep.
You don't punish failure because people go quiet, they hide, they lie about it, etc., etc.
Huge, yeah.
So he normalized it, incrementally rewarded, all their best efforts, and he built up that team from the bottom up, and they became one of the most highest performing groups in the US Navy, and that pattern is now being rolled out.
What's that called? Turn the ship around.
Turn the ship around.
Yeah, that sounds like a great read.
And then we've got these other techniques, and this is what kind of proves that this top-down stuff doesn't work. The US military now use something called mission command, which is basically, federating decision making, because obviously back to the skin in the game. If you've got these layers of bureaucrats in this layered top-down system, which is, I'm going to just call it out, Scaled Agile has these features. Yeah, right. So that's what I'm saying, you have to modify it.
Yeah. Beware of Scaled Agile.
You have to be very aware of it because it's full of these kind of administrator layers.
The whole idea of Agile was to remove these things anyway, right?
It was, and then the Scaled Agile kind of reinserted it. But if you can pay attention to that and then allow it, so what you need is to get context so that people making decisions have full context. And we now know is that the best people to make decisions are the people where the context is happening, so at the lowest levels of these leaves. So that's why mission command as a structure works. Like you need to be able to make decisions where things are happening, where the action is happening.
That gets you immediate feedback as well. Exactly. Looping back to what we were talking about. All right. I think we can keep on going for this. This is great. I do want to touch on something that I know you're truly passionate about, and it goes back to the whole leadership thing. So I think we touched on a number of things and talking about going back to Lean Sony's work, and you need an environment where you create trust. You don't have that fear of conflict. You're free to speak the truth. And you're going towards a common goal or that intention towards that results. But trust, empathy, so big for creating that environment as the foundations of that high performing team. And then you need those leaders to act as those sort of garden beds to keep that sort of structure in place.
Yeah, and they're gardeners. Like
they're pulling the weeds out. They're gardeners.
Exactly, and they're experts in their own domains. And
protecting them from the shit from the above.
Yeah. So that you've seen. Don't you've seen the meme that be a shit umbrella, not a shit.
Yeah. I spoke to Paul Napier recently, and that was his. He's a big fan of servant leadership, and he talks about that. The whole bit. You're either a shit funnel or you're a shit umbrella as a leader. Like that's there's only two things. So yeah. Speaking of leadership, you touched on, if people are in these positions and that abuse of power can happen, the Dark Triad.
Yes.
It's such a good thing at labeling, I think, reasons why, or maybe not labeling reasons why, but identifying these character traits in people in these positions that abuse these levels of power. And you see this across the board, not just in
all industries.
In all industries. I mean, look, I know one of I'll let you discuss. Let you tell the audience about what the Dark Triad is. You go ahead before I jump in. Right. One of them I gravitate a little bit towards. And me saying that right now, you can probably already find out what it is.
I had a discussion with the Thunderlands team about this as well, because they've done a post on this. Yeah. This is Chris McGowan. He posted something I found really interesting, that there may be a benefit to these attributes that some people have, and there is. If you think about it, because it obviously wouldn't exist if there wasn't an evolution.
It gets shit done, which is one of the main things. Yeah.
So back to kind of, I'll just recap what it is. Dark Triad is basically it's the pyramid of psychopathy, sociopathy, and narcissism, right? And what you'll find is people with these traits...
Machiavellianism.
And Machiavellianism is part of psychopathy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But that's like a category that most people don't experience. Most people don't even know that. One, they don't know that triad exists. Yeah. And the more interesting one is most people don't even know that Machiavellians exist. Because they're very much hidden. Yeah. Right? So, but
they're masters at being able to communicate, influence, and persuade, right? Yeah.
And they're highly intelligent. So what these individuals are, they're basically people on and it's a spectrum of like low empathy. Mm-hmm. So they're very able to make decisions that benefit themselves and kind of literally sacrifice others. And it's on a scale where like narcissists are basically operate for recognition and for
That's-
social recognition of themselves.
Yeah, that's kind of like the low empathy part. I find, and I don't want to cut you off, I find that Machiavellianism is kind of like the flip side of that. They have like ultra high empathy, but they just don't care. They know they can almost put themselves in your position and then use words that sort of speak to you, that pull your triggers and know that's going to influence you.
I'll modify that.
But then come back.
I'll suggest that Machiavellians have no empathy, but they are so intelligent they can mirror. The idea of empathy.
Yeah.
Because they're socially sophisticated.
Maybe yes. Well, they understand it then.
Yes,
and
they understand. I've met a few.
Yeah.
That's how I know that behaviour exists, and I also know that I won't mention the person, but this individual had learned, and he had a very high awareness over people's behaviour, and he even built like a game plan, which he explained to me in detail about how he knows if he prods this person this way, that person will make that reaction, and he had a whole almost like a mathematical system designed, which kind of describes what the network effects would be if he made one change over a period of time as well. This is something else that you'll find in Machiavellians. They know that most humans have a temporal bias. We're very short-term in thinking, not all of us.
Yeah.
So what they'll do is, it's called the Overton window. They'll introduce like a really nasty concept, but piece by piece.
Yep.
Till over time they get to where they want this.
Yeah.
Sometimes that takes a decade with some systems, and most people don't even notice these things are going on. This has been happening, I don't know, we may have spoken about it. It's been happening with legislation. Since the war in Iraq, in the US they've been changing legislation, but each time they make these changes, it gives more and more power to the state. And people don't notice because it happens over a decade.
I mean, that's another. And I think I see a wormhole opening here, but I think one of the biggest ones was that I saw as I like to think of me being a pretty woke teenager when it did happen. It was when September 11 happened, and then there was a big change in giving power to police about arresting people on the assumption that they were a terrorist, and then they were basically guilty until it was something like that. I can't remember the details, but it was a big thing that didn't even go through the proper approval process. It just got changed like that over a whole big fear thing at the time. And
well, the biggest one is people didn't notice that their police, and this, I grew up with this, the bobby in the street in the UK wore, a hard hat and was there to serve and protect. Mm-hmm. Now, look at any police in most Western countries, they're wearing bulletproof vests and they carry a sidearm.
Yeah,
and that's happened.
Well, we have
a very short period.
Yeah,
they were not doing that when I grew up.
Well, in the UK they don't have it.
In
the UK they don't have it.
That was it.
They still do. The foot police aren't allowed. I
think they are beginning to arm police.
I thought you had to be a detective. Like it was a certain level. Like you can't just be like your everyday policeman and have a gun. Where here it is. You get a sidearm straight away. Bang. Yeah.
And I think I might be wrong about this, but I think they're beginning to arm police.
Yeah. And you got those. I think they're the counter-terrorist unit. You see them around London. They're fully equipped, which I kind of want them to be. So yeah, if shit goes down, I'll be hoping that guy turns up on my door. But yeah. Okay, sorry. Dark Triad. We drifted a little bit.
But yeah,
Machiavellianism, narcissism,
and they rise to the top of most systems because they're willing and able to make decisions that most of us with empathy would not make.
Mm-hmm. And they're experts at playing that game.
And they're experts at kind of read, like some of them, like obviously it's on a scale, but the Machiavellians more so, they're experts at reading social systems and then leveraging different techniques. So there's concepts like, what's it called? Crisis capitalism, where, and it's Hegelian dialectic, where you create the problem, then you create the solution, and then you benefit from what happens at the end. And you'll see this with like Munchausen by proxy, where nannies will put the child in harm's way, get rewarded by the parents for saving the child from harm when they engineered the whole thing. So it's that at scale. Wow. And you'll see people do this within organisations to get recognition, and you'll see them do it in politics, and you like it. So it's that, and most humans don't even know that this is going on as a thing because they don't understand that this dark triad and the techniques that they use. And there's a whole set of techniques that they
seen that example of what you just said, and having gone through a fair share of bushfires, and it's a firefighter who starts the bushfire in the first place. Yeah. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So that's one of the challenges with leadership. You may notice that, and obviously you can't run around like a non-expert labeling people, going, oh yeah, he's a psychopath, and a lot of people aren't. Right? No. So, but some people may demonstrate some of those. They may demonstrate low empathy, right? Or they may fall into a pattern where they're very judgmental, and then they'll make decisions that can be perceived as being like self-serving, but really they're just being ultra-judgmental. So that's why you have to develop your own set of expertise if you want to start. I wouldn't run around diagnosing people unless you've studied psychology to any level of depth. I'm not going to plead to experts, because that's another anti-pattern, pleading to authority. Mm-hmm. You need to take ownership of what you understand in the world, and you need to bring your knowledge to a level where you can make informed decisions.
Yep.
And not be entirely reliant on experts.
Yeah. Okay, and that's fair. So it's a good thing to be aware of, but
don't run around because. My rule of thumb is principle of charity. Everyone's trying to do the best they can with what they can. Empathy will guide your decision making, but you're right in saying this, you must be aware there are bad actors that exist, and they're on a different path to you, and you need to have tools and techniques to manage those situations. And what you'll find is, and it's frustrating, annoyingly, most of the systems that we've got in place allow the Dark Triad personality traits to arrive at the top. So you will invariably find at most leadership levels, there's a larger number of those type of individuals than there should be.
Yep.
Right, and you need to learn how to navigate that.
Yeah, there's a few studies out there that CEOs in America and New York, that was like a large proportion of them had high levels of psychopathy and Machiavellianism. To be active, and it's kind of like the way that those organisations were set up is like you had to be. To be able to make those tough decisions, and it's easy for me to say, like kind of looking from the outside in, that you have to be, but it'd be great if we can foster communication and leadership strategies and organisational strategies around different growth, because I think the world would be a much better place.
It's true, and it's also why, again, we're talking about transformation, why transformations fail. Because you'll have these leaders that are only serving their own agenda. Yeah. Like they might only be in there for 2 years, so they build up all this investment in things that shouldn't. And I've seen this a lot, by the way, in Australia and the UK, where these leaders come in, especially C-suite. They'll make a whole bunch of decisions that benefit them over the 2 years, but do not benefit the long term for the organisation. Then they swan off to their next gig and leave a massive mess for everyone to clear up. Mm-hmm. So they get this huge reputation by investing in these big named projects that take them nowhere. Yeah. Because they're not really in it, and again, skin in the game, they're not really in it to help the people that are actually building that company up and there for like decades. They're just in it for those 2 years to get a reputation. Yeah. And again, the system encourages that behaviour.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. So I put a few things from your LinkedIn profile, and one of the things that I loved was your slides that you gave out there around design thinking and how you implemented that in a few of your roles. I think it was iCare, GBST, in structuring the architecture for some of the digital projects that they did. Do you want to run through that just briefly around what role design thinking plays in transformation in these organizations?
That's an awesome segue. So for me, transformation, if you're going to be moving the dial for an organization so they become oriented around delivering value, because obviously one of the problems with traditional models is it's very much related to delivering off an assumed backlog. Like we've got all these big plans from our hippo, highest paid person's opinion.
Okay, that's a good one.
And that hippo said build these 10 things, so we're building them. And you build them and then you find the market doesn't need it and it doesn't work, right? So that's the old traditional waterfall, top-down leadership model. And a lot of organizations fall into that anti-pattern. But what we're moving towards is delivering actual value. And to do that, you actually sit with the actual customer and you test and prototype your idea with them. And more mature organizations will actually co-create. I was doing this with that customer. We were doing this at Macquarie. So I want to give you an example, and we're doing design thinking there as well. So I worked in infrastructure in COG. We were building infrastructure apps that serviced hundreds of other teams. So we build an app, it would go into an area where they can go and use it, and it will give them functionality where they can get stuff deployed or managed or viewed or you name it. And obviously the temptation is, I know what you want, I'll go and build it and give it to you. You just suck it up and use it. And if it doesn't work, you just have to wait for my next release because I'll just assume what you want next. But we didn't do any of that. We actually sat with that customer and said, you draw out, like we've got this idea of what we think your problem is and what, we did some analysis and we did personas and like empathy mapping and journey mapping. But what we did that was really evolved, and I credit like my two bosses, is Michael Hassler and Fabiano Menezes, and our team for coming up with this. Like we basically did a design thinking approach where we sat down with them and said, you draw out what you want, just you wireframe it. And obviously some people have got drawing skills, some people don't. And they would draw out the app that they wanted. And obviously some of those things were really insightful. Some of them were hard to interpret because a lot of people have very deep domain knowledge that we didn't have.
Sure.
And others were in between. So, but what it did give us was this amazing kind of feedback on like what their perception of the world was versus ours and what we were missing.
Yep.
Because we got them to design it. So what we then did with our UX though was then build out an experience that kind of took in the best of what they were putting and the best of what we could do, because obviously we had a lot to deliver. And we got 2 cycles of this where we were literally co-creating what they needed, but with our engineering skill sets and our UX team to get that built out.
Yeah.
So working directly with that customer.
So what you've done there, if I've listened correctly, is design thinking has enabled you a system to actually create empathy with other business units, so you could build a product, not necessarily what you think, but understand what they're thinking and kind of like combine.
Yeah, and it directly solves the challenges and opportunities they'd identified, along with what we've identified. Because obviously, and this is what collaboration really is. It's like the Venn diagram of mental models. Like we have a perspective they don't have, which is more holistic. Like we're basically building this infrastructure platform. It's called Max. And
what was it called?
Max. The Max platform.
Okay.
It's micro front end based.
Sure.
I helped build out the technology behind it. So, and then we were talking to these individual programs that needed these individual problems solved in unique ways, but without that holistic view of how that plugs in or how you could combine them together. Because we actually built a technology where these different solutions could also combine and add an additional capability as well, which is super interesting on its own.
Yep.
So, but that empathy of sitting with them and building with them was huge because they got to see what they designed go live as well.
What a great feeling.
Yeah, and it also meant that we knew we were solving problems that were directly causing them issues.
Yep.
So their productivity was literally going through the roof because these are things that they were living with, and they were going, this is a problem for us, it's been problems for months or years. Just solve these 5 things, and we worked with them to get them solved, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. So, and that incorporates that feedback loop that we're talking about there. And
you obviously have that standard design, the double diamond process where you kind of diverge out and do your kind of experiment. You come up with your ideas, and then you narrow down on a hypothesis statement, then you expand out and prototype, and then you narrow down on your solution statement. So we just went through that process, but many iterations, and that allows us to kind of evolve that perspective. And it allows us to kind of get a really good understanding of what the routine and life, and this is linked to ethnographic research, where you study the life of the person that you're building for. Yep. You live in their shoes.
Fantastic. So that's what design thinking actually does. It allows you to give that perspective.
Yeah, it's ethnographic research.
Ethnographic research. Wow.
And some of the best product developers don't focus on where the timeline between that user using the product. They look outside of it as well. So look at like the moment you get up, brush your teeth, all of that.
Everything that's come into it,
Like your whole lived experience becomes the context for how you then arrive using their product.
Yeah, I guess that's like how the whole Alexa and all those things out, like where they would position the design of them.
That's why Apple and Amazon are so big on collecting data on everything. They want to know, they want to scan your room. That's what the vision is all about. So they can see what you're doing on a daily routine. That's what Alexa and
always recording, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's to build out this model of like, what is the customer's life? What decisions do they make throughout the day that then inform their decisions when they're using our products and services? So we can then build this and this is where these digital twins come in. They then build these artificial simulations of your daily routine, and then they can make predictions. And this is Black Mirror stuff. About you're now going to decide to use this at this time and that at the famous Target thing 15 years ago, where this is 15 years ago.
This is going
Target accidentally pushed an ad to a dad,
Target, the shopping center.
To a dad about his daughter being pregnant, because their algorithm had correctly predicted she was like 2 or 3 months pregnant, using just some basic stuff, because she started shopping for basic baby products. But they then started pushing ads to her dad.
And she hadn't told her dad.
Wait a minute, who's pregnant in my family?
Hilarious. All right, mate, this has been awesome. I've got a couple of quick fire questions here, and just to sort of wrap things up. But I think we've learned a lot from this, and really, really enjoyed it. So I want to thank you for coming in right now. If I don't do it at the end. Okay, cool. So, these are questions I'd like to ask everyone. So, who would be the most influential person that you've worked with, and why?
That is a really good question. The most influential person I've worked with is a lot, actually.
Yeah.
I couldn't really pick one.
That's all right.
If I can pick.
You don't have to name them either. I guess what were the character traits of them that made them so influential? Name it if you want to.
No, I've worked in architecture, and I was actually very nervous. It's my first, and you can kind of see this in my CV. It's my first move into architecture. I became a digital architect, and I was really, really nervous, and I felt underqualified. But the guy who was assigned to work with me really sat down with me to talk through like what the discipline involved and what to consider and how they work and all the things that they do, as architects and enterprise architects. And it really helped me get a really deep appreciation for the craft, but also the techniques. And they did it in a really psychologically safe way, because I was very vulnerable. I was very I still have it, but I had imposter syndrome on steroids. Like, it's disabling level imposter syndrome.
Fair enough.
And he was kind enough to kind of talk me through like everything that he does without me making me feel like inadequate or incapable. And they were, and also my boss at the time structured what they were giving me in a way that I could handle each stage of, and they kind of knew it was new for me. And I really, really appreciated that. Like, it was really, and that helped me grow as an individual, and kind of move into different areas, and also raise my empathy around how enterprise architects, the problems they solve, because there is this concept as an engineer that they live in an ivory tower, and it's, in some dysfunctional organizations that might be partly true, but it's obviously, like with everything, that bubble of like the sun diagram and a dot about what you know about people. Their lives are, there's so much more to what they have to consider and worry about to keep the enterprise afloat, and so many disciplines and practices and standards that they're adhering to, and techniques they apply to get this kind of enterprise visibility of change. And it really raised my appreciation for that craft, but it gave me something which has set me up for life. It gave me the ability as a technologist to understand how that fits into what I do. So now everything I do, especially as a technologist, senior one, I try and make sure I've got really strong enterprise architecture alignment, because I know a lot of the techniques and practices they follow. So I'll give you some quick examples like capability models, application portfolios, and API portfolios, and also this, you can kind of build out this ecosystem of all the applications and technologies within an organization as well. This ThoughtWorks have got like a technology radar that allows you to kind of map out where your investments sit, even if you've got hundreds of them. Right. So what you'll find, a lot of organizations don't do this, and that means you can't make very good decisions
Yeah,
because
okay.
you don't know what capabilities you've got.
Yeah, sure. Interesting. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so yeah,
So
that person in particular really helped me.
Yeah, creating that psychological safety.
Yeah, and he helped me grow. Like, he gave me a space where, because I jumped into an area that's totally unfamiliar.
Okay. Okay, cool. What habits do you contribute to your success as a tech leader?
Back to what you said before, listening and giving trust and empathy, like putting time and effort into making sure I really understand another person's perspective. Because I used to get frustrated with people that I would perceive as like not doing what was right, you know, doing things that you could label as wrong, you know, or bad practices. And what I've learned over the years is to kind of go to the root cause of that, not jump into judgment and go, oh, you know, I don't want to work with that person, they're annoying, they're constantly making decisions that are damaging, blah, blah, blah. Instead of doing that, sitting down with them, working with the teams that may have these challenges and trying to understand where the root cause of that is coming from. How are they arriving at that decision? And then something else, and again, an amazing leader that I worked with at GBST who ran their digital team. She taught me the techniques around just asking questions to help the people that you support arrive at the right answer for themselves.
Yeah.
You don't give answers to people. You build a framework where they can arrive at the right questions for themselves. So they then arrive at their own intuition and, you know, light bulb moments, right?
Yeah.
Their own eureka moments. And that's more valuable than you telling them what to do.
Yeah, 100%.
So asking questions is one of the major skills of a leader. Just ask the right questions and you prompt this kind of independent thinking.
I love that. Absolutely love that. What is your favorite leadership book and why?
I would say it's Simon Sinek's Why.
Start with why.
And start with why.
Yep.
And because it covers, like, one of the big things for me is like people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do.
Oh, love that. Yeah.
So you have direction.
Yeah.
So yeah, huge. And it's obviously a big Simon Sinek fan.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. I remember his TED talk, the first one that came out about that was based off that book, and it was the circle of trust.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why, what, why. And I can recite it, everything. It's so good. Yeah. I love it. Okay. One piece of advice you would give yourself when you first started out in your professional career?
Yeah, surprisingly, I didn't know this back then. I'd say accept failure as learning.
Huge.
I really wish I knew that.
Yeah, huge. And I think,
accept failure as a part of learning.
Yeah, that's
if
huge.
I'd known that when I was younger, and to embrace it and not run from it, or see it as a punishment. And it's like, and I'm now a big fan of the exploration-exploitation trade-off, where you kind of map the territory. And some, again, mature organizations will deliberately plan failures as well. Like, this is where you're being very tactical. Mm-hmm. So you push a bet out in the market, or it could be with, and this is where evolutionary architecture, I know you've heard of this, comes from ThoughtWorks, where you deliberately kind of, and I'll give you a quick example. Like, say, what you're trying to do is map the territory of all available solutions within the market or technology space, and sometimes you're making bad choices, just so you know that that particular square doesn't work.
Yes.
So you can then map the territory and go, right, don't go there again, because that's broken.
We already tested
Go
that.
there, because there's opportunity there. And say, for example, as an architect, and I did this at Macquarie, I span out, because I had to build a micro front end, and it's an impossible task.
Right.
And I tried it 2 or 3 times before, and it was really challenging. But what I was doing, I'd spun up about, I think, 12 different micro front end frameworks. And then I ran different solutions that we needed for our target state through them, but small MVPs. And they gave me, what I loved is they gave me space to do this, 3 months to kind of just muck around. And I was following the evolutionary architecture stuff from ThoughtWorks. So I just span out all these different solutions, and I killed off the ones that didn't meet my fitness function. And so a whole bunch of them, and it's a lot of work. I sacrificed because they just didn't work. They didn't meet. Like auth didn't work, or I couldn't get API connectivity working. I couldn't get them working within our networks in a certain way, and I couldn't get apps deployed that were reliable across the enterprise. All these different assessments. So, and I ended up arriving at like three particular frameworks that were working, and that allowed me to kind of narrow down what I was doing. What you'll find is a lot of organizations don't do this. Like they'll just go architect solution and build it, as opposed to like, why don't you just test out the ones that are going to work and then get rid of the ones that do, and then hyper focus on the ones that are working for you, which is again a bit like design thinking. You prototype on what's working for your customer and then narrow down on it. So this exploration-exploitation trade-off and accepting failure as a way of learning is huge.
Yeah, so huge. All right, cool. And what do you think, this is something that's pretty personal to me, being a dad, how do you think that's impacted your ability to be a better person and also being a more effective leader?
I've said this and it's a bit controversial, and I know Jordan Peterson has said this as well, and I think this is because I've studied some of this as well. The moment that you smell your child after they're born, the pheromones cue a change in the brain. Your brain gets rewired.
Yeah, sure.
And your empathy goes up because you build an attachment to your child. So, and I've noticed this. I actually noticed that change as a dad, because obviously you become hyper focused on making sure that your children are protected and safe. Yeah. And you then build this kind of a very, very deep relationship. So empathy being a huge part of being a dad. And it extends because obviously I now see the people I support, and I know people hate this in the industry. They don't like people using the word family, but I do see that when you build the right relationships with the teams that you support, you are building a family. And obviously people they like to say that corporations isn't like going to work with a family, but what you should try and have that as a vision, because if you don't aim for the stars, you're not going to hit the moon. So for me, it's like, still see it as a family. It's obviously not, but because what you're trying to do is build community, and you're building communities of trust and trust networks, right? So, and you can do this in the family, because within the family, if there's failure becomes acceptable within the family. But what you'll find in corporate structures, failure isn't acceptable. This is why, trying to dismiss this family label is not quite that good, because you're avoiding the ability to build these communities where everyone can support each other and grow. And this psychological safety just becomes a default. Doesn't become something that you have to do as a mandate. When you start building it as a community and a family, with that type of focus, but obviously objective, because it's still you're going to work. If you have that mindset linked to that being a father and being a dad, it's huge, because that all informs your decisions in supporting the people that you're responsible for.
So it's giving you that practical experience that you can replicate in the workplace, of giving that psychological safety, empathy, and creating trust.
Yeah.
I love it. Thanks very much for coming on board.
Thank you. Thanks for the question.
No, that's all right. Thank you.